Hi, I'm Caroline.
And I'm Adrienne.
And this is Scandal Sheets. Hello and welcome to Scandal Sheets, the podcast that explores the scandals of history along with the people and places associated with it. I am your host, Caroline.
And I'm also your host, Adrienne.
Yes! Hostesses with the mostest.
We are.
How's it going?
It's fine.
You look concerned for some reason.
No, I just wasn't ready.
Okay, so get ready.
Okay. I'm ready to talk about another
cool building.
Cool building and interesting family for many reasons.
Right, yeah. So today we are going to head back to New York City and talk about the Astors, primarily John Jacob Astor III. No, not the third, sorry.
Fourth.
The fourth.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. See, this will
Wait, so who... I didn't know there were that many.
Yes, and they all use the same name. So
that's really confusing.
Yeah, so if you get confused in the course of this podcast, don't feel bad because they all
Are we
going to
say JJA4?
No. Although he went by JJ and Jack. So he's a little easier to pick out.
Sure.
But some of the others,
Who
not so
is
much.
the person that I abbreviated and I just did it because it was long? And you were like, no, he really did go by that. And
William Randolph Hearst.
There you go.
He
Because
went
I
by
called him WR and,
yeah.
I didn't know. It's awesome.
Yeah, it turns out that he went by WR.
Who
so
knew?
I should caution you that this particular episode, at least on my end, is going to be kind of history heavy. I'm laying the groundwork, and I feel like a lot of this...
But it's good history. You won't fall asleep.
Right. I hope you never fall asleep while...
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
No, we hope you don't.
No. So
unless you're listening to us while you're
trying to go to sleep,
and I guess that's okay.
A lot of people do with podcasts, and I'm kind of like, dude, I get really upset when I fall asleep during podcasts.
Yeah, I do too, because then you have to rewind. And
right.
Where was I?
Right.
And, did I hear this? And then sometimes you wake up and you hear a snippet, but it's a spoiler. And
yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't be able to listen to us or anything with a narrative, I guess, while I fall asleep.
No, not at all. All right. So we are headed to late 19th century New York City, the Gilded Age. And John Jacob Astor IV was born on July 13th, 1864 in Rhinebeck, New York. His parents were William Backhouse Astor Jr., and Caroline Schermerhorn Astor. And as I mentioned before, I want to talk about his parents because their origins factor heavily into the way that he was raised.
Okay.
So William Backhouse Astor Jr. was part of this Astor family. They were an American success story in many ways. William Jr. was the grandson of the first John Jacob, who was born in Germany and immigrated to New York following the American Revolution. Now, he was originally in the fur trade, but eventually moved into buying and selling lucrative real estate.
But always up in the Northeast. Or always up in New York?
Yeah.
Okay.
Didn't really ever go anywhere else.
Okay.
Actually, a lot of early New York was either owned by or passed through Astor hands. Mm-hmm. And as an interesting aside, Astor purchased much of the property that Aaron Burr owned following his little disgraceful
That's
duel
interesting.
with Alexander Hamilton. When he was short on cash after everything fell apart, he started selling his property off, and Astor bought it from him. The first John Jacob generally bought property and then held it. That was pretty much his philosophy. He was like, I'll buy the property, let other people buy their property and improve it, and once my property is worth a lot more, then I'm going to sell it. Yeah, okay. Which actually is a fairly good business plan, I think.
Yeah.
The one exception to this was that he built his first home, or the first family compound, on Broadway, which was very fashionable at that time.
Broadway was residential?
Yeah, it was originally. He ended up buying up his other neighbors, their homes, and then he mowed everything down and then built a hotel called Astor House.
Oh my gosh.
And
is that still there?
It is not, no.
Oh.
That's the thing with the Astors. A lot of what they built is no longer there.
Unlike the Vanderbilts.
Well, yeah, Vanderbilts are kind of 50-50.
Oh.
Some of their stuff's still there.
Okay.
But I mean, I think you could say that about a lot of New York. A lot of New York has been lost.
Oh, certainly.
You know, particularly during the 20s, you know.
Certainly. And what was the Astor House? When was it built?
I think it was 1840s, 1850s.
Oh,
1840s.
Okay.
Yeah, early 1840s.
So a mid-century, but not
Mid-19th
the
century?
mid-century
Yeah.
we like.
Yeah. And it was the most fashionable hotel in America, and dignitaries such as Abraham Lincoln, Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, and Jefferson Davis chose to stop there when they were in New York.
Okay.
Now, when the first John Jacob died in 1848, he'd amassed an estate worth $20 million in modern day money. And at the time, he was the wealthiest man in America. So the majority of that fortune went to his second son, William Backhouse Astor Sr.
So the builder of the Astor House's son.
Yes. His
Okay.
first son was John
His first
Jacob
son.
Jr.,
Okay.
but was not in he either died before Sr. died or was mentally incompetent, so he couldn't inherit anything.
Astor House
So-
was built in 1836.
Okay, there you go. And so his fortune went to his second son, who was William Backhouse Astor Sr. And then, William Sr. studied in Germany. He returned to New York City and continued to work in his father's trading companies. And they, by this time, had expanded to China, so they were trading with China. And then he began acquiring real estate on his own as well. So he married into a good family, and they had 7 children.
Wow.
So their 2 oldest sons were John Jacob III
Okay.
and William Backhouse Jr.
Okay. I
So
was
basically, this is kind of
conflating
the
the Backhouse and the John Jacob. Okay.
right.
Okay.
So pretty much every generation had a John Jacob and a William Backhouse.
Got it.
And it just went through, different.
Okay.
These 2 oldest sons would eventually form opposing sides to the family. So they're
Oh.
like the 2 main lines. Some say that they didn't get along, but I think that what happened later on kind of reflected on them. I think more they were cool with each other, but they just didn't have much of a relationship.
Okay.
John Jacob,
And these were 2 of 7, or this is the
2
next generation?
this is 2 of 7.
Okay.
Yeah. John Jacob was 8 or 9 years older than William Backhouse Jr.
Okay.
So I think that probably accounted for some of the personal relationship issues. This is where we're to JJ's father, William Backhouse Astor Jr. So by the time he comes along, the Astors are pretty well established in the city. He graduated from Columbia University in 1853. He married Caroline Schwimmerhorn.
Okay.
Now, Caroline's family settled in New York in 1636.
Oh my.
So they are the original Dutch settlers from the
That's
Netherlands.
amazing.
She went by the nickname Lena, which kind of makes me wonder how they pronounced her name.
Oh, Caroline. So was it Caroline?
Yeah, I really don't know.
Yeah.
I get.
Maybe it's spelled differently.
I've had
and it
lots of
was
people
Americanized.
pronounce my name Carolyn, even though it's Line,
Okay.
which drives me nuts because I'm
Yeah.
always like, it's Line.
Line.
So, right, line. Maybe I have her to blame for that if she was Carol.
Mm-hmm.
Carolyn, and Lena, anyway. She was quite keen on reminding people about her ancestry. So after marrying into this ridiculously rich Astor family, she turned her mind to having and raising children, which was basically the occupation of most 19th century women. But it should be noted that she was less dependent on her husband than some wives because she did inherit her own money.
Okay.
So
she married into it, but she had it on her own. She
as
didn't
well.
have, okay.
Right. Now, she and William Jr. had 5 children together. JJ was the last child and the only son. So 4 daughters and then finally the son.
Wow.
So if you have any acquaintance with Gilded Age New York,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as depicted in the Edith Wharton novels, you will know that there's generally a female gatekeeper to society. She was never really called out by her specific name, but there's always some character that, is the person who decides who's fit to socialize in certain levels. So Caroline was that gatekeeper. She eventually became known as the Mrs. Astor, and that causes some interesting issues with her nephew later on down the line, but we're not there yet.
Don't like waiting, Caroline.
I'm sorry. This Caroline is credited with developing the concept of the 400. Basically, the 400.
I did read about this.
Yeah. It was basically 400 New Yorkers that were considered the most socially acceptable.
Yep.
Now, the common myth is that she came upon this number because 400 people could fit in her ballroom. But that's actually not true.
Yeah.
She sat down with her cousin by marriage, Ward McAllister, and they basically developed all the families that they thought that were worthy. Now, I find this a little bit ironic because he was actually born into a very lesser branch of the Astor family. He was actually born in Savannah.
Oh.
And grew up in California as part of the gold rush. So not, definitely not hoity-toity East Coast education.
Which branch is this?
It's just one minor cousin branch of the Astors. Yeah.
Okay.
I think his mother was the granddaughter of the original John Jacob Astor or something like that. So I find it kind of funny that Caroline even deigned to socialize with him, but apparently he was pretty good with the whole sycophant routine, so I guess he just flattered her. Then in the end, it's all about who you know, right?
And who you flatter.
Exactly. So given that the Astor's wealth was created from real estate, it is completely understandable that they would give back in terms of real estate in the city. Now, William Jr. and Caroline lived in a palatial townhouse at the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street. Their next door neighbors were William Jr.'s oldest brother, John Jacob III, and his wife, Charlotte Gibbs, who was from South Carolina.
No way.
Yep.
Wait, as in Gibbs Museum?
I think
it has to be that family.
Yeah, the biography said South Carolina, but I'm assuming Charleston because the Gibbs family was such a prominent family here from even the very beginning of the city's founding. So.
Oh, that's interesting.
In addition to this palatial mansion in the city, William Jr. and Caroline frequented other Astor properties, including Beechwood, which was their Newport cottage. Do you know anything about this particular era? You will know that these houses were not cottages.
There's no such thing as a cottage.
Right.
In the way that we think of a cottage.
Certainly, yeah.
And it's interesting because when... This is just a little aside, but, architectural terminology like that, it has really changed because, like a townhouse, a country house. Well, if you think of a townhouse now, you think of something that's, kind of smushed together with other units and it's, 2 or 3 stories, but, you would have your house in town and your house in the country. And then with cottage, it's not,
it's the seaside. So I guess I thought
maybe it's geographical
cottage.
rather than architectural.
Right.
Because I like the idea of a cottage, like a Nantucket cottage that's
4 rooms,
600 or 700 square feet, and a few blocks from the ocean. Or
here in Charleston, we have freedmen's cottages, which were built for freed slaves following the Civil War, and many of them are only like 700 square feet. They're tiny.
Well, that's a whole other conversation. It's not a freedman's cottage. It's a single... That nomenclature isn't necessarily accurate because they weren't necessarily built for freed slaves. They were just like working class
people, okay.
For either African Americans or white working class. So it's not just a freedman's cottage. And that was changed. I think there was a thesis on it. Anyway, yes. It's not accurate to say freedmen because that's not why. They were built up until the teens, 20s for other working people, working class.
So there's essentially, basically, one-story iterations of the Charleston single house, which is basically a shotgun style.
It is kind of a shotgun. Yeah, you're right.
Except just kind of more of an exterior
with an exterior
corridor.
Hallway. Yeah. The circulation's outside and you can go from room to room.
Right, exactly. But yes.
Anyway,
so the Astor cottage at Newport was definitely not 700 square feet.
Right. About 10 of those could fit into
more than that.
One of their cottages.
Yeah.
You're right, probably more than that.
They were like 10, 15, 20,000 square feet. It was totally insane. Yeah. Now, they also owned Ferncliff, which was their house in Rhinebeck, New York. And is that near Long Island or...
Where is Rhinebeck?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Rhinebeck is on... Oh, it's right across the Hudson River from a place called Kingston that has a very cool arts festival. Now it's twice a year. It used to just be once a year. It is due north of New York. So I'm